All right, good afternoon, everybody, and Happy New Year. Thank you for joining us today for our first webinar of 2017. My name is Jeff Yeagley, and I will be moderating today's webinar. Before we go ahead and get started and introduce the topic and presenter for today's webinar, I just want to cover a couple quick just housekeeping rules. Everybody's line has been muted to prevent any background noise or any type of distractions during the presentation. If you have any questions, we will have some time at the end for a Q&A session, so feel free to pop those in the chat box. You can address them either to myself, again, my name is Jeff Yeagley, or you can address them to the entire group. Either which way, we'll go ahead and we'll answer those at the end of the presentation. We will be sending out copies of the presentation to all folks who registered for the webinar, and also we are recording it, so it will be posted to both our website and our YouTube channel later this afternoon. So if you'd like to share that with a colleague, or there's some information in there that you wanted to review, you can go back and have the opportunity to do so. So today's webinar is on some significant changes that were recently passed actually up in the state of New York, governing all financial institutions in the state of New York. These take effect in a couple of months, and we'll get into that in a few moments here. But our presenter today is Josh McDonald from Compass IT Compliance. He's one of our IT auditors, has extensive experience working with clients across a number of vertical markets, as well as being kind of our go-to guy for all of our stuff internally as well, and getting us in a good position. So he's got a breadth of experience, and I think you guys will enjoy today's presentation. So without further ado, I'm going to turn it over to Josh. Go ahead, man. Take it away.
Thanks, Jeff. Thanks for everybody for attending. As Jeff mentioned, we're going to be looking at the recent New York cyber law changes for financial institutions. Quick overview of the agenda. We're going to look at the new regulation itself. We're going to look at 5 key areas of change. What are those changes? The notification requirements in the event of a security incident or breach, and then some effective dates and exceptions or extensions to those dates for certain pieces of the regulation. You'll definitely want to pay attention to the dates. And then we'll have a short Q&A at the end. We'll answer a few questions. So just submit those as Jeff mentioned. So the New York Department of Financial Services proposed new regulations taking effect March 1st this year. They apply to all financial institutions, including banks, credit unions, money transmitters, consumer lenders, insurance companies, and any others. You fall under any of these types of organizations, you're going to fall under these new regulations. So 5 key areas of change. I'm going to dig into each of these in detail. First, you're going to need to establish a cybersecurity program. If you already have one, hopefully you only need to tweak a few things. If you don't, it's going to be quite extensive, but it's important, and it's all best practices. So this will be based on having a risk assessment. We'll talk about the timelines for the risk assessment a bit later. Your cybersecurity program is going to be designed around the CIA triad. If you're not familiar with that, it is the confidentiality, integrity, and availability of information systems. So the following core functions are going to need to be part of your cybersecurity program. You're going to need to identify and assess internal and external cybersecurity risks that could threaten the integrity of what they've defined as non-public information. There's a slide further down where we'll see what is non-public information, but for now, think about it as PII, personal identifiable information, things like social security numbers, addresses, license numbers, things like that, healthcare information. And then, like I said, a later slide will provide a reference where you can go to see exactly how they define it. Your cybersecurity program is also going to need to use defensive infrastructure to protect any non-public information. Things like firewalls, intrusion detection systems, intrusion prevention systems. You can implement a UTM firewall, so Unified Threat Management Firewall, that includes IDS and IPS to secure that data. Policies and procedures will be a big part of this, as they're a big part of any cybersecurity program. And we'll go into what kind of policies and procedures are required shortly. you'll need your cybersecurity program to be able to detect cybersecurity events. So you'll need things like continuous monitoring, periodic penetration testing, and vulnerability assessments. And we'll talk about how often those need to be done. It will have to be able to respond to identified and detected events, so you can mitigate those effects of a breach quickly and appropriately. The cybersecurity program will also need to be able to recover from events. So things like incident response plans are going to be very important. Maintaining audit trails so you can reconstruct material financial transactions sufficient to restoring the business to normal operation. And the last piece, as they define the cybersecurity program, is to be able to fulfill all applicable regulatory reporting obligations. The big one in this is the requirement that you report any incidents within 72 hours. We'll see that a little bit later on another slide. It can be fairly overwhelming if you have nothing in place, but just so you know, if you have an affiliate organization, you can adopt their program, and that qualifies as long as it meets all of the requirements I just mentioned. And then, if you're a smaller shop that doesn't have a lot of in-house resource, there's always third parties like Compass that do some of these pieces, risk assessments and policy and procedure development. So you're not alone. There are a lot of resources out there to accomplish all the pieces to this cybersecurity program. So the next one on there is around the policies. You need to adopt cybersecurity policies and procedures, and these go hand in hand with the cybersecurity program. Each entity needs to implement and maintain written policies and procedures. They have to be approved by a senior officer or a board of directors. And they need to include how you protect that non-public information stored on your infrastructure. So the policy and procedure list, as I mentioned, is quite extensive. They want you to have an information security policy, data governance and classification, which is where you risk rank all of your data and assign risk levels to that data and who should have access to it, how it should be stored. Asset inventory and device management. That's pretty straightforward. Access controls and identity management policies. Business continuity and disaster recovery planning. That's a fairly large one if you're a bigger organization, but that's required in here. And if you're a smaller organization, there are exceptions for some of these. They basically say if it's not applicable to your organization, if you're too small or you don't do some of these things, you can leave out certain policies and procedures. The key to policy and procedure writing is always making sure you're doing what you say you do. So when writing them, it can be a little time consuming with the back and forth with upper management, and also making sure you're doing the things you're writing in the policies. You don't want policies saying you're doing one thing and you're not doing it. So that's just a key piece to note, especially when the risk assessment comes around. Often you get assessed to your own policies and procedures. So you want to make sure you write what you're actually doing. Some of the other ones, system and network security, system and network monitoring. If you develop in-house software, you would need policies and procedures around the application development and the quality assurance process. Physical security, kind of a no-brainer. You need to have physical security, environmental controls, a customer data policy. Vendor and third-party management is a big one I'll talk about a little bit more shortly, but just know that you have the most time to complete that one. So don't be overwhelmed by it. And then policy around your risk assessment, how often you do it, and the procedures around it, and then incident response planning. So that's kind of the full policy and procedure set they're looking for with these updated regulations. And maybe you have a lot of these in place and you don't have to worry as much. You just have to add a few, tweak a few here and there. But as I said, there are resources if you're starting from nothing today. So the next one on the slide is the role of the Chief Information Security Officer. If you already have Chief Information Security Officer designated, great. If you don't, that will probably be one of the first things you want to do, trying to make sure you're compliant with these regulations, because it's the responsibility of the CISO to make sure that this cybersecurity program is put in place and enforced after it's put in place. The the Chief Information Security Officer, they say, can be an employee. It can be part of an affiliate organization, or you can use, and this is good news for a lot of folks that aren't ready to bring one on full-time, you can use an outsourced Chief Information Security Officer. So you can pull that person in from a third-party organization. Some of the responsibilities of the Chief Information Security Officer in regards to these regulations are that they will have to report in writing annually to the board of directors or another governing body for your organization on the cybersecurity program and its risks. So the confidentiality, integrity, and security of information systems will be part of that report. A report on the policies and procedures. Any risks to the entity will need to be part of that report. And then the overall effectiveness of the cybersecurity program. So they'll be reporting on that as well. How is the program working? Do we need to tweak? Do we need to make any changes? And then the final piece that they'll be reporting on, during that year, were there any material cybersecurity events? Those would also be reported to the board. So those are sort of the requirements of the Chief Information Security Officer role in regards to these new regulations. The next one is the pen testing and vulnerability scanning. It requires annual pen testing, if you're not doing it already, and then biannual vulnerability scanning. So you want to make sure you get those in place. We will see the dates for those a little bit later. You do have a fair amount of time to get those done, so don't get too concerned with those. Oversight of third-party service providers. I mentioned this a little bit already. You have the most time to complete this one. What they're looking for here is a vendor management program, really. You'll have to implement written policies and procedures designed to ensure the security of non-public information, which is accessible by a third-party vendor or is held by a third-party vendor. You may hold all your data with someone else. So in those two cases, this applies. You would have to identify and risk assess third-party vendors that fall under those two qualifications. You would look at things like their minimum cybersecurity practices. What are the minimum requirements they must meet to do business with you? That will need to be defined. You'll have to define a due diligence process for evaluating the adequacy of their cybersecurity processes. And then you'll have to periodically review and reassess the vendors on a regular basis. Part of this third-party vendor management includes writing guidelines for that due diligence process I just mentioned. And that would include reviewing their access controls, including multi-factor authentication for critical systems containing non-public information. It would include their policies and procedures around encryption in transit and at rest. I mean, these are things you want them doing anyways if you're working with them. This is just really defining the guidelines around that, making sure you're doing it, making sure you're reviewing these things on a regular basis. And then the final two, you want to know what their policies and procedures are around notifying you and other regulatory governing bodies about a cybersecurity event. So if one occurs, what do they do? You know, how fast can you expect them to inform you about a breach? And then the last piece around the guidelines is representations and warranties, addressing third-party provider around their policies and procedures. Okay, so that covers this slide. Those are the major areas of change and kind of what's required. Okay, so what are the additional changes? They had a first draft of this and then a second one, so there are some changes here between version 1 and version 2. Protecting non-public information, as I mentioned, you can consider it PII, healthcare information, all of that. But if you really want to dig down and read how they define it, you want to look at the Graham-Leach-Bliley Act's privacy rule. You would definitely want to check that out and see what they define as non-public information, because all of these regulations are based upon non-public information and how do we secure it. So you need to know what that is to start. And then they broadened what defines personal information, using that act and current protection laws. Periodic risk assessments, they say need to be updated regularly to reflect changes. And that's talking about changes in your organization. Maybe you roll out a new application internally, or implement all new firewalls and network gear. Any major changes that could introduce a new security risk or vulnerability to your organization, you want to update your risk assessments. You might want to perform an additional one and just update those gaps so they can be secured. And then the last one is that senior management will annually certify that the entity is in compliance. So they'll write it, sign it, and send it in, and we'll see the dates for that requirement, I believe, on the next slide. Okay, notification requirements. Any breach must be reported within 72 hours from the incident to the superintendent. And then those annual statements that I just mentioned will need to go to the superintendent by February 15th annually. We'll look at the date for that in a second, the year, because I don't believe it's this February. It's going to be the following one is the first time it needs to be completed. It'll need to be signed by the board of directors or another senior officer in the organization. Okay, so effective dates. The regulation will take effect on March 1st this year. I believe there's still a little over a week to submit comments and questions and feedback on these regulations. I think the cutoff date is the 27th, and then it goes into effect March 1st. Organizations must be compliant by September 1st. With that said, there are exceptions that we're going to see on the next 3 slides for certain pieces of these requirements. So the first 1-year extension includes the following. You have until March 1st, 2018 to have the Chief Information Security Officer's annual report to the Board of Directors. This list is mainly annual pieces that need to be done. So you have an extra year to complete all the annual pieces, minus multi-factor. That isn't something that occurs annually, but the other ones are. So that annual report to the Board of Directors you have until March 1st. The annual pen testing and biannual vulnerability scanning, you have March 1st, 2018. The risk assessment, same thing. Those can be quite drawn out and extensive. And as I said, you get risk assessed based on your policies and procedures. So you want to start working on those before you do your risk assessment. Multi-factor authentication piece. And then the cybersecurity awareness training for staff. That will be an annual piece again, and you have until March 1st, 2018. So there's an 18-month extension on the following pieces. September 1st, 2018, you have to have the audit trail in place with 5-year record retention. There's the application security requirements, limitation on data retention, and implementation of the risk-based policies. Again, you know, the risk assessment piece is annual. You need more time to do all the extra policies and procedures around the risk assessment to identify those and write them. So you have extra few months there. And then encryption of non-public information. You have the same date, September 1st, 2018. And the final piece, as I mentioned, you have the longest amount of time to complete the third-party service provider piece of the puzzle. So you have March 1st, 2019 as the date to get that third-party vendor management process in place and rolled out, where you're vetting your vendors and you're reviewing them regularly, including the detailed risk assessment, which I mentioned is those, you know, those guidelines that you're assessing, you know, all of their access control pieces and policies and procedures and making sure they're secure before you start doing business with them. And I'm going to leave this slide up for a few minutes so you can look at some resources here. And then if you have any questions, send those into Jeff if you haven't already. We'll try to answer a few questions here and talk through some of these items.
Awesome. Great job, Josh. And folks, just as a kind of another piece, I should have shared this at the beginning of the presentation, and I apologize that I didn't do that. You saw throughout the presentation, there was a number of different pieces where it referenced different sections. Those are actual sections of the proposed legislation. So what I'll do is when I send out a copy of the presentation to everybody, as well as a link to review the recording of the webinar, I'll also send out a link where you guys can go, and it's actually that first link. So if you want to copy it down, you can feel free to do that. But I'll send that out and include that in there as well, so you can go through and look at, from top to bottom, the entire proposed regulation that's going to be taking effect on March 1st. And as Josh mentioned, there is another week of comments, a little over a week of commentary still open, but this did get pushed back and some changes were made. This was originally supposed to roll out on January 1st, but the comment time frame brought up some concerns around some of the pieces that were included in the original proposed legislation. So it's interesting to see, but this is important not just for financial institutions that are in New York, but really financial institutions across the country, because this was really groundbreaking legislation to put this in writing and mandate that all organizations comply with this different regulations for financial institutions. And this could spread to different states. We saw that with state privacy laws back when Massachusetts did theirs, and when we continue to see it spread to, I think, 48 different states across the country that have privacy laws now. So anyway, we'll include that information because I think this will be important not only for folks in New York, but outside New York. So I'll stop yabbering here, and I'll give you guys some questions that we got that came in. So the first question that I have here, Josh, this is for you, of course. What qualifies as multi-factor authentication?
Okay, so multi-factor authentication are usually two forms of authentication. It's either all right, so I'll give you three pieces here. It's something you know, something you have, or something you are, and you have to pick two of those for it to qualify as multi-factor authentication. So something you know would be like a username and password. Something you have could be a security token or a smart card, one of those tokens that changes every 30 seconds. And then something you are would be biometric, so fingerprint, eye iris, voice. So you need to pick two of those to have true multi-factor authentication.
Awesome. Good. That's a great explanation of it as well. Second question. I love this question, being on the sales and marketing side, so I apologize for self-promotion there. Does Compass offer outsourced official roles? I can kind of answer that one. Yes, we do. We offer that to a variety of organizations, whether it's in the financial institution space, we do it with some healthcare organizations, and we do a lot of the other things, of course, as well that are required, such as the pen testing, policy and procedure development, and all that type of stuff. Josh, is there anything you want to add to that? I know that you handle some of these pieces for some of our different clients in regards to our outsourced Chief Information Security Officer role.
No, I just add, as I said, policy and procedure writing can be quite tedious, and that's one I think we're really able to help people, look at what they're doing and round those out and help assist and write them. And it can be so daunting when like regulations like this, where you have to have 10 to 12 of them, and maybe you have none of them in place now. And we'll go in and help people do that, and I think it's really valuable for our clients.
Yep, good point. It's probably one of the least fun things that you have to do in terms of writing policies and procedures, for sure. So we have two more questions here. Third one, this is a great question, actually. What qualifies as an event that must be reported to the superintendent within 72 hours that you referenced earlier?
All right, yeah, great question. So here's how they define it. Any event which requires notice to a governing body, self-regulatory agency, or any other supervisory body. So if you are required by any other organization to report an incident, a cybersecurity incident, then you should also be reporting it to the superintendent, as well as any event that has a reasonable likelihood of materially harming any part of the normal operations of the organization. So if it's one of those two things, if you're required to report it to somebody else, you need to report it in this case. And then if there could be a material harming event to the normal operations of your business, you need to report it as well.
Awesome. All right, last question here we have that came in is, how do these regulations apply to financial services located outside of the state of New York?
That's a really good question. I know the Department of Financial Services does supervise institutions outside of New York. I will need to circle back, if we can get your contact information, on how it's going to relate if you're outside and doing business in New York. Yeah,
we can grab it. I have the contact information for the individual that asked that question. And I think, if you're a financial services institution outside of New York, there might be some impact. But I think the bigger piece is if you're a vendor, because they're going to be under some stringent, requirements to do business in the state of New York. Again, I hate to keep going back to this and referencing this, but this is very similar to what happened in Massachusetts back in 2008 when they rolled out their state privacy law and basically said that, any organization that holds any data on any resident of Massachusetts, regardless of where they're located, needed to adhere to the state privacy law. So this could be a similar type scenario. While it's, just kind of focused specifically on vendors that work with financial institutions. Again, the question is, does this catch on to other states in the area and across the country? Again, Massachusetts started it out, and then now we have 48 states. So all of varying different degrees as to what the requirements are. So could be interesting to see how this kind of plays out over the next 6-12 months for sure. Those are the questions we have. If anybody has any last minute questions, please put them in the chat box at this point in time. I'll give another 20 seconds while I kind of share about next month's webinar, and then we can answer those if any additional ones come in. But thank you for those folks that asked some questions. So next month, we're going to talk about everyone's favorite topic, not policies and procedures. We did that in October. We're going to talk about vendor management, and we're going to talk about third-party service providers, because there's a lot of focus, not just in the financial institution space, but really in every space, and additional scrutiny on when you outsource different business functions to organizations. How are you ensuring that they protect your data? Who's on the hook if there is a breach? This goes back all the way to 2013, which seems like eons ago, with the Target breach, in terms of how that whole situation broke down, which really drew a lot of attention in the PCI world to breaches and how they occur. So that's going to take place at the end of February. That information will be put up on our website a little bit later today, so you can go ahead and register there. I don't see any additional questions that have come in, so I want to say thank you to Josh for presenting on this topic. Again, I think this is a critical topic because of the ramifications it can have, obviously for financial institutions in New York, but again, across the country as this gains more traction and adoption. So thank you to everyone. Thank you, Josh, for presenting. Thanks, everyone, for attending. And again, look for that email coming out a little bit later today with the presentation slides, link to view the webinar recording, and for everyone's reading pleasure, the actual legislation or proposed legislation from the state of New York, a link that you can review that online. So thanks again, everybody. Enjoy the rest of your day, and we look forward to presenting to you again in the future. Take care.
Thanks, Jeff.